I'm an engineer who's come late in my career, I guess, to the insurance industry. I'd make a note I work for Willis as Managing Director of a new practice dealing with capital science and policy. And I guess to some extent reflects the fact that in one of my previous roles I was a Chief Scientific Advisor to communities and local government and sort of dealt with some aspects of government science and communities. So what I want to give you is a bit more of an engineer's view, I suppose, of what I consider to be the issues around resilience and interdependence. I would reflect, though, that Willis, for whom I work, has got a very notable research network of around about 50 academics in universities around the world, and we are very keen to build evidence and strong grounds for supporting the work we do with clients to give them the best sort of cover. And I know we feel that there should be strong incentives for our clients to consider resilience, to design for resilience, and maybe government needs to require companies, for example, to have a resilience statement in their balance sheets. So I'm going to talk, as I say, from a relatively engineering point of view. London is a city of systems. You can see that from this satellite image. You can see the M25 there very clearly. The complexity is hidden by the scale, enormous amount going on. But diagrammatically, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, clearly there are many interdependent systems. The community, energy, logistics, mobility, food, etc. All of those critical and interdependent. In work I did with Treasury quite recently on engineering interdependencies, there are both advantages, if you like, synergies of some of those systems and also antagonisms in the sense that you can get cascade failures. If part of those go down, then there can be other issues which you need to deal with. There are many contexts. There's a city scale, so all the way through from the products that people use right the way through to entire cities and districts. And each of those have different interdependencies, both across the scale and across the systems. So the key themes that I tend to think about, but I won't have time to cover in this presentation, are challenges associated with sustainability, resource use, social future-proofing, climate change, resilience to natural and man-made events. Issues like, for example, food availability in cities, very critical. If people don't have food in shops, it is said for 3 days they go feral. Opportunities like value aggregation through businesses working together, innovation, economic opportunity, transparency, safety, and so on. There are also enablers and threats. So the enablers, I will touch upon the first one. Obviously, Sir David, very critically interested in this digitally enabled integration through the big data story, the Open Data Institute, and so on. The threats really, again, are typified by the top one, which is a lack of holistic thinking across sectors. So we really do need to think of the city as a system and a system of systems, echoing the first speaker. The first point I wanted to make was about climate change, which is all very familiar now, but the actual impact on society is immediate, and it's not just about mitigation, it's very much about adaptation, and that picks up the point to design for resilience. So without dwelling on this, this is the Keeling curve, the way in which CO2 is going up. That may or may not, depending whether you're a climate skeptic, have any bearing on temperature rise, but temperature rise is in fact real. And the Met Office are now combining their climate modelling with their weather models, and we all know the weather models are quite good over a week or so. Climate models, much more statistically based, actually are very accurate too. And the black line is data tracking the prediction in red. So the summer in 2003, those who remember it, will become normal in the 2040s and potentially cool by the 2080s, according to the scenarios that you might look at. And of course, there are a spread of those. But as we know, I think it's going to be greater than 2 degrees globally as an average increase. That leads to urban heat island effects. And when I was in DCLG, obviously, we were very concerned about the health and well-being issues. The colours there indicate the gravity with respect to mortality risk, and we had around about 900 excess deaths directly associated with overheating in the UK in 2003, and there were about 25,000 across Europe, so it's a very serious business. And I was very concerned when I was a Chief Scientific Advisor that we actually made sure that new buildings didn't make things more unsafe. So I think, without going through this in detail, adaptation is the first thing we have to think about, and resilience and, if you like, the insurability also links to that. The second one, very importantly, is about energy. We need to decarbonise energy. We need to think very strongly about nuclear. Get on with that. If we decarbonise electricity, we can actually have electric vehicles that actually do save the carbon emissions. At the moment, charging electric vehicles from a coal-fired power station or a gas-fired power station is almost carbon neutral. And then, of course, we mustn't forget mitigation. We've got to do all the right things to reduce our carbon impacts. Again, I probably don't have time to go through this, but I was the responsible officer for the climate change risk assessment for the built environment. I think it was in about 2010, and we identified some particular issues there. One of the ones that touches the insurance industry is the expected annual damage to residential and non-residential properties as a result of extreme weather. And I think the flood discussions are very interesting in that light, and there needs to be a sharing really of responsibility between the private sector, government and the householder, I believe. Resiliences and interdependencies are a very interesting topic. This is a real picture of an event that slowed me up going home to the south coast. Just around South Croydon about 2 years ago, the water main burst. It put mud all the way across the main line, stopped everyone getting home for about 4 hours. So when you're running infrastructure parallel, you have to be thinking about failure of one influencing the other, cascade failures, and that's really what this discussion's about. I'm not going to go into the detail here, but the resilience of city systems are dependent of many different topics. There's disturbances, vulnerabilities, interdependencies. We can sense and we can measure and fuse data to make inferences about risks of failure. Within a city, we have many interdependent systems, and this relates between these nodes. So you've got water, for example, feeds into buildings, food feeds into the workforce, and you have dependencies one on the other. And if part of that system fails, it can bring the rest of the system down. And understanding the risk there is another angle to insurance, I think, a further sophistication which we will need to bring in, and indeed government is looking at right now, and I guess the city's catapult will be looking at. We can estimate resilience. We've got all the mathematical tools for that. We know about cascade failure when you're designing an aircraft or a power station. Systems can be made to be redundant. You can have parallel systems, but doing that costs money, and you need to have a calculus to work out when it's worth doing, what the cost of the risk is. If you're looking at infrastructure, this was a chart produced by the engineering institutions of the Royal Academy of Engineering, showing the different things that can be affected in infrastructure versus the climate change issues. And you can see the red ones probably need to be addressed first. You can't read that in detail, but maybe these slides will be made available afterwards. And this, I think, is quite an interesting salient slide. This relates to the interdependency in Italy, and this was from Treasury presentation, between electricity supply and, I think, the railway system. And you can see in these plots that the resilience goes up very quickly with a number of links, if you like, the redundancy in the system, but the cost doesn't necessarily go up quite as fast. So there is actually a sweet spot for different systems in terms of the amount of resilience you want versus the cost you're prepared to put in by adding parallel paths. So echoing really that very quickly, you've got antagonistic interdependencies, my story about the water main bursting, taking the railway down, but you've also got the synergistic capability. If you think about the story of High Speed 2, running a fibre optic link down the side of the railway makes very good sense for both in business, but you've actually got to get the businesses to think in an aggregated way, and the Olympics ODI was a very good, the ODA, was a very good example of businesses being forced to think in a linked up way to achieve outcomes and to work to a cost. Big data and smart cities is another topic I'm going to skip through quite quickly, I think, possibly, but a great enabler, I think, in knowing what's going on. You can mitigate risk by predicting failures, doing something about those before they actually happen. There's a lot of business opportunity in measuring things and fusing that data together to create new insights. There's a lot of opportunity around for the private sector in small businesses, larger businesses, and the Open Data Institute under Sir Nigel Shadbolt is looking at that very carefully at the moment. Social network feeds are also interesting with respect to health, for example. So there was an example where the norovirus, the vomiting virus, was detected by Twitter feeds before the medical authorities actually got wind of it at all, and you can start to see the spread and control in cities. So you can integrate data in cities. These are a number of different examples: energy efficiency, flood simulation, social data, for example, crimes, public consultations can lend evidence for referenda. And we can look at service synergies in cities which can lead to business and economic growth. Finally, and I hope I've caught up slightly, so the organisers may be pleased with me, the government is taking this very seriously. So apart from the Technology Strategy Board backing the city's catapult, which is a fantastic opportunity, they also did the Future Cities competition, which Glasgow won, I think it was 2 years ago. Runners-up were London, Bristol and Peterborough, as I recall. and they're now running a Foresight Future of Cities project, which is about public policy delivering via cities, centres of innovation and growth, and there's going to be a cross-government view across departments of how innovation can uplift performance and economic value in cities. So thank you very much indeed for your attention.